you're seeing more and more dramas where people are explaining the fact that the person has a gun. Well, I can see they have a gun. Well, they can't see it if they're on the phone also watching the thing. So if you listen carefully, it's sounding more and more like a radio drama. Barry, you've walked into the room. What do you want? Well, I'm watching the TV. I saw Barry walk in the room. Why are you telling me that Barry's walked into the room? You're going to get that more and more. It's awful.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the pod. It's a very special episode of The Collector today. We have our first ever celebrity. I'm a little bit anxious, to be honest. I didn't think I'd ever get the chance to talk to him in real life, but it's a real pleasure that he's been so kind to give us his time. I'm going to let him introduce himself because I think he'll do a far better job than me, but he's a very interesting guy. If you'd like to join me welcoming Mr. Paul Chato. Take it away, Paul.
Thank you very much. Chato.
Paul.
It's okay. It doesn't matter.
Chato. Sorry. Nerves.
It's Hungarian. It's actually properly pronounced Chato. You emphasize the first syllable whenever you're speaking Hungarian. Anyway, so that's my background. My parents were Hungarian and I was born in Canada against my will. And you're so much of who you are made up by your experiences. And I was raised a Presbyterian, but found out when I was 18 that I was Jewish. So that's a kind of an interesting shift in one's life. Maybe that's why I'm so funny, is because although, when I was as a Presbyterian Jew, I'm both able to fix things and buy things wholesale, which, makes it very convenient. Although now I feel guilty about not being Presbyterian. So I grew up in Toronto in a designed community called Don Mills. It was the first, I think, manufactured community in the world because in 1960s, I remember a German documentary group came in to actually film how Don Mills was created around the ravine, and we had this centralized shopping mall, and it was quite interesting. Apparently, we were unique in the world, and so that was kind of an idyllic, boring life. And when you have a boring life, you do things either turn to crime or turn into your head. And I decided to turn into my head and become the funny person in the classroom. And initially, I wanted to be a nuclear physicist. So Ernest Rutherford was my hero. Sir Ernest Rutherford. I totally liked the Manhattan Project. I was enamored by it, and Enrico Fermi and all those cats. I dug them. But then one person said, you're pretty funny. Why don't you go to this school and go into TV? And I went, okay. So I did that, and I graduated from Ryerson Radio Television Arts. But instead of going right into radio and television, I had learned how to do design, and I was always a cartoonist. And I went to the school newspaper, cartooned for them. And out of that, I learned how to use the typesetting equipment. And then I became a typesetter and then a designer. And then I became a graphic artist. And I did that for a bunch of years. I became head of marketing for the largest stereo chain in Canada. And then a good friend of mine and I were yakking and we said, hey, do you want to do two-man stand-up comedy? And we went, yeah, let's do it. So we became Green and Chato. It was the only time I think I ever hung up on my mom. She was just screaming on the phone. Why are you leaving that $10,000 year job? Oh my God. And then I went, Mom, I can't handle this. Click. I hung up on her. So then I became a two-man stand-up comedian. There's a lot of two-person stand-ups in the UK. I mean, some very classic individuals. And one of the reasons I was into comedy was, I think my first exposure was the Ed Sullivan Show. But on radio, the Goon shows were hugely, hugely influential for me. And I very much got into the British style of Dave Allen and you have a fantastic history of comedy, which mostly I think is wiped out now, thanks to political correctness. But I'm glad that I got a chance to explore the classics. And so from that, joined up with two other guys, created the Frantics, and we became, I would say, a very successful Canadian comedy group. And in the United States, Dr. Demento spread our Boot to the Head sketches. That became hugely successful. Taekwon Leap and Last Will and Testament. We were actually on in the UK briefly in a television show called Four on the Floor, and Mr. Canoehead became famous. And so I did that. And then after about 15 years with the Frantics, touring and radio shows, we hung up our skates. And then I auditioned for a VP role at Paramount in the United States. And then for whatever reason, I said no, came back, became head of TV comedy at CBC. And then after that, I went, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. And instead, because I was also a programmer, I started a new media business company in 1991. So that was called the Digital Soup Company. The name has changed. It's now Your Web Department. We're into the web, but at the time we were doing CD-ROM, and I had 15 employees, and our clients were Daimler Worldwide, Mercedes, Smart Car, KPMG, McDonald's. It was quite the ride. And then I just got tired of flying all over the world, working for Fortune 500 companies. It wasn't my bag. And then we created a service called Your Web Department, where we host and build websites, and we charge $30 a month. And we're still doing that. I've got a team of people, and I'm slowly drawing myself out of the business. But what's really cool is I learned a lot of business ideas from working with the Frantics in terms of how you deal with brainstorming and how you treat the initial ideas of people, how people are so much more attached to their first generation of ideas, and you have to treat them carefully. A lot of people in business will jump on that first idea because they don't like it. And that's just not how you brainstorm. And you also have to, if you trust the people you're with, then there's a way to treat people. And if you trust the people, you know that if they generate an idea that isn't particularly good, 90% of the time they will self-edit and realize after they've told you the idea, and I call it tasting the idea, they will actually go, you know what, that sucks. Forget about it. So don't jump on the person, give them some time to actually cogitate over it, and let them decide whether the idea is worthwhile or not, because why create a confrontation? Although some business managers love confrontation. I mean, that's really what they live for. But that wasn't my bag. And I was not an ego-driven business manager. I didn't walk into the pit, as I call it, and, look over the sea of my programmers and go, that's my people. Those are mine. And I'm enjoying. To me, that wasn't the way I worked. But I had rules too. So for instance, if something, in the end, I was always responsible for the final product. And I would say, you can question me, do whatever you want, up until the moment I say, stop, you can't question me anymore. I don't care whether you think the last 15% of this job is being run correctly by me. Shut up. I have to get it down. I have to get it out. It's up to me. It's my decision. But up to that point, you can question things, do whatever you want. That's fine. But in the end, I don't need you to be chattering in my ear right to the very end of the project. It's just not going to happen. It's not the way I work. And people got used to, one of the things that people really like if they're employed with you, is that they love what the limits are. They understand what the rules are. People do not like working in an open-ended environment. They want to know. I mean, they might get pissed off at you. They say, well, I don't like, what the final decisions were that you made. I said, yeah, but I mean, was it 60% right? Yeah. Okay. Then fine. I win. And so that, I learned that from working with the Frantics. I also learned one valuable lesson was, even if you give advice in good faith, too much of it too often will wear the other person or the other people down, even if it's not your intention. And sometimes if people know the routine, just leave them all alone. And everyone has a different journey. And just because they don't take the journey the same way you would do it, that doesn't mean that the end result isn't the same. So a lot of people get caught up in throwing the rock in the middle of the creek when all they needed to do was just let it flow. And yeah, as a manager, you do need to keep track and say, oh, are the timelines being met? Are the clients happy? And if you see some evidence for things not going quite the way you think it needs to go, well, then sure, have your conversation. But let them have their journey and see if they end up in exactly the same spot that you wanted them to end up at the very end, then what's the big deal if they didn't do it the same way you did, right? So these are business things that I learned that have been really helpful, and also dealing with clients, with regards to not being afraid of clients. One of some of the things that small business owners are totally caught up in is being afraid of the client. And no, because I learned very early, and I would often say this directly to a client, that your feelings about what we delivered, let's say first drafts, is 100% correct. Your feelings are correct, but your ideas are 100% wrong. we're in the business of correcting our mistakes based on how you perceive it should be. So yes, we are completely in agreement that the thing that we delivered you might not like, but don't offer us ideas on how we should fix it. That's up to us. We're the professionals, but we 100% trust your feelings that it's wrong. That's your business. That kind of stuff. The other thing that I learned to do, this will be any kind of secret, business professionals or young business owners should use. This is a great secret. Don't tell this to my clients, okay? And that is, sometimes a client will come up and say in the middle of a development project that they have an idea, they want to go in a different direction and you've got a fixed budget. And one of the problems with being a creative person, and I've seen it many, many times, is that the moment you hear this idea from the client and you know in your gut it's not a good idea, and then you immediately get your hackles up and you start being argumentative about those things. It kind of, how do I say this? Makes it difficult working with the client because, again, they're invested with their ideas and have an idea of how they should be presented. But there's a potential budgetary issue. So, okay, fantastic. The idea is great, but you're expecting us to do it on the budget that we agreed to. So I'm trying, how do you fix or deal with both those things? Well, I came up with a great way to do it. The moment the client expresses an absolutely stupid cockamamie idea, I go, that's fantastic. I love it. That is a great idea. Let me go back and price it out.
Well, I didn't know it was going to be extra. Okay, forget about it.
Right. So you win by them saying,
I didn't know it was going to be extra. Okay.
Or they go,
yeah, go price it out.
Then suddenly you got a bigger budget.
That's almost like, it's almost a textbook police de-escalation technique.
Is it?
Do you know what I mean? You kind of, you've absolutely, you could face it head on and get engaged emotionally, but there's nothing worse than telling an angry person to calm down, right?
Yeah.
And it's like,
exactly.
By engaging with the idea and going with it, but maybe introducing a new variable like you did, that kind of takes the pressure out, slows it down.
And the client does not feel like they've been attacked. Their ego is intact, which is also really important, is to manage someone else's ego. So yeah, having rules, people in the shop knowing what the expectations are, knowing what the deadlines are, treating them with respect because you hired them because you feel they're competent. I mean, one of the reasons my company was successful back when I had lots of employees was I hired people who I respected. It basically ran itself. I didn't really have to do much, because they were all good people. Now we're a much smaller shop because everything's in the cloud. We don't have to do as much programming. We're using AI and all the stuff. We have a small staff here in Canada and then another one in the Ukraine. And yeah, so it's in a lot of this stuff I learned while I was a comedian. Isn't that funny? Isn't that weird?
Well, I think I'm not a stand-up expert. I'm a fan of comedy, and and I'm a fan of, have you heard it, Stuart Lee?
Don't know him.
Okay, I'll send you some links later. But like things like George Carlin, comedy, and I'm going to not steal any of Howard's thunder because Howard does want to go into comedy in a bit more detail with you later. But I think, especially from a stand-up point of view, you have to be so sensitive to your surroundings, right, and the emotions of the crowd, and you have to be thinking, 10 steps ahead where you're going with the bit and everything like that. And I think there's lots of kind of planning and strategy and engagement and communication. So it's not just telling jokes, right? It's a difficult place to be.
It's accidental planning. You write the jokes, you go out and you just do it. I'm afraid stand-ups are not, they're intellectual about their stand-up they can talk about it post haste or in post, but when you're in the middle of it and you're dealing with the audience and hecklers and things like that, you are a racehorse. You're just going for the finish line. You don't really think about it. I mean, there's stuff that you do, you improv. I've gotten myself in potential trouble by riffing on stage and going, okay, I've just stuck my foot where I shouldn't have, but I'm going to keep on going and see if I can dig myself out of this hole that I've created. And that creates tension and fun. And I mean, it's a very exciting, I'm not a stand-up per se. So, the Frantics were a sketch comedy group, more along the lines of Monty Python.
I love comedy. As a human being, I'm no expert. I'm just a client of comedy. I have been all my life. I mean, at 5 o'clock this morning, because I had to get up to pee, I was watching
Russell Peters, 4 shows back to back.
A Canadian.
Yeah. I'd just given up watching the start of binge watching season 4 of The Witcher because they seem to have changed the lead actor, which I found offensive. It just didn't work, but hey, that's me.
And they put an Australian in, of all things.
Well, for me, you don't change a fixed format, Anyway, the thing for me with comedy is I picked up something from one of the many Oscar or Grammy award ceremonies, the typical one where all the hoi polloi, the actors and everybody but the comedian come to get industry awards, but they always have a comedian to front it because they've no ability to present themselves. And there's no award for comedians. And that really struck me because when I look at a comedian, any comedian, there's a real skill set in terms of communication. And even though, like you say, it becomes instinctive, and yes, I appreciate that in the situation of a comedian, if you have a bad night and you bomb in front of an audience, it's just a bum night in front of an audience, where in law enforcement, if we have a bum night, people die.
Which is actually funnier.
Yeah, same. Yeah, well, sometimes trust me, you need a bigger sense of humor in law enforcement than you do in life.
Yeah,
when some of the things you say, that's just a coping strategy. But for me, you've got all these layers of complexity in the way that, in essence, you are communicating with individuals and in a group setting. So you're managing people, you're entertaining them to keep them engaged. You're trying to deliver to a very rough kind of script, or maybe just a few bullet points that you're going to change, like you say, you'll ad lib and go off maybe to a reaction in the audience, or maybe just some creative spark in your head that sends you off in a tangent at some point. But the real skill is, when you do that, being able to come back to the theme. And lots of stand-up comedians, certainly these days, seem to have this process of pretending they've gone off on a riff somewhere in the middle, and then suddenly they go back. And that's clearly a skill. It's been deliberately done. It's not an unconscious thing. It's just, look at me, aren't I good? And they are. I'm not knocking it. But the successful ones have got all these layers of communication going on and are engaging with the audience. And I appreciate what you say about, well, a lot of it's accidental or it's made up. I'm not sure whether you're doing formal classes or you're just learning from life and the experience. I look at what everybody does in their professional, personal life as a journey. Even if you're a bricklayer or a refuge worker or somebody serving burgers in Wendy's, you're learning every day in your interactions with people. You fall out with your mum or your best friend or your girlfriend or boyfriend screws you over, or your kids teach you a lesson about yourself, or your dog even. We're all human beings collecting data, processing it, looking at the consequences of what our actions are, the decisions that we make, and then revisiting it. And I wondered if there were any secrets in the way that you've learnt to engage with your clientele within comedy that carry over, that you think might carry over as generic processes outside comedy in other areas. Because I see the same, or some of the same cultures and structures and processes within business, within government organisations like law enforcement, health service, utilities, that kind of, local government, and within the private sector. And even within societies that don't have very strong government structures, or, some of the third world countries, they've got better and more developed communication and decision-making processes than we have with all our technology and all our tools and so-called sophistication. Does that make sense? And is there anything you could offer to us?
Wow, that's huge.
Sorry.
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one is there's a discipline in comedy, and you mentioned George Carlin. There's more of a discipline than a lot of people think. There are comedians who don't like going off script. Chris Rock, for instance, talks about the fact that you've paid $100 plus to see him. Why should he be riffing? Yet Russell Peters is much funnier. His bits, when he talks directly to the audience, are much funnier than his routine. I don't find his routine particularly funny, but he's so fast, so quick. So again, and then when you're a professional at the level of, let's say, a Russell Peters, who can perform in a stadium, 15,000 people, you do have an obligation, and you really are putting your reputation and your show and the show on the line by going off script. So I've seen Louis C.K. His stuff is written right to the nth degree. It sounds off the cuff because he's a comedian and he knows how to deliver it. And George Carlin, another person who does not screw around with the words. or didn't screw around with the words. I mean, words were very, very important for him, and it had to be in the right order. And to tell you the truth, a comedian does understand that a joke that gets the first draft of a joke gets a certain kind of reaction, and they think, you know what, this joke should have worked better than it did. They go back and they work on it. One of the things that you learned in stand-up, and I've done enough stand-up, I'm not fantastic, is that sometimes the fact that you came up with the idea so quickly in your creative brain often means that you've got to give the audience the benefit of the process through which you came up with that joke. So do you have a Costco in the UK?
We do, yep.
Okay. So, I mean, I have this joke. So I went to Costco the other day. To get a large screen television, and I left with a 12-pack of 60-inch Samsung. So people get that. However, I found that if I went and it didn't really get much of a laugh. Then I went, hey, everyone here shop at Costco? You know, everything's in bulk, right? Well, I went to Costco the other day to get a large screen television, and I left with a 12-pack of 60-inch plasmas. Then it got a bigger laugh.
Yeah.
So now I don't use it all the time, but then one of the tricks in writing is, okay, what more can I do with that as opposed to just leaving it? I do have jokes where I just leave it, such as, the thing I hate about cleaning the washroom is that I know eight months later I got to do it again. So the thing is, one day I might just collect all my cleaning houses or maintenance jokes and then string them together because that works. So with the Costco one, I started thinking, okay, well, you know what steak in bulk at Costco is? Cow. So I'm at the checkout, and the lady is really angry at me behind me, and I point, I'm at the, express checkout. I only have one item, lady. I know this is taking a while. So I push the cow through the checkout, and I drive home, and I strapped it on the hood of my Hyundai, and I got to my apartment, and then of course the elevator's out. So I'm pushing my cow up 5 flights of stairs, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm getting good exercise, but also I'm losing a stake of floor. And so I finally, get it home and take it into the apartment, and everyone's excited about that I brought dinner home. And I asked my wife, when are we having dinner? She says, now. So I got out the air gun, the one that puts a steel bolt into the brain of the skull of the cow, and it fries its brain. And I got it at Amazon. It was a discount. And I put the air gun to the head of the cow, and my daughter goes, I'm naming it Flossie. And I go, shit, I can't kill Flossie. So I take it into the other room where I've got Gertie the goat, and Trevor the turkey, and Mary, Margaret, and Margaret the chickens. And so I have 2 choices. One, either tear up my Costco card or sell my daughter.
I love how dark that got then.
So, I mean, it gets a good laugh when the idea that I go into a room and there's already named animals that clearly I wasn't able to kill because my stupid daughter has named them on me. And that just creates these visions in people's heads. It's not a direct joke. But so I'm just mentioning that is that every comedian, for the most part, unless they're Steve Wright, tries to come up with a story based on maybe jokes about the theme, so they can just keep on going and build the gag. And that's just writing. And then so figure what order you want the jokes to be in. And then you go on stage and you hope that you remember them. Some people tell stories about their life. You see young comedians, especially if they're of ethnic origin, they invariably talk about that ethnicity. And then they'll graduate out from that, where that no longer is really that funny. And they'll start talking about other stuff. I like, to me, what did I write the other day? And I'll mention something else too. I saw watching Jeopardy with the wife. The answer was most popular gay dating app. I gave the wrong question just not to raise any suspicions from her. So yeah, so those jokes come. And so the point is, if you are not writing every single day, you're not going to be a comedian.
But the thing with what you're saying is, comedy is a discipline, but there's lots of ways of approaching the same objective.
It's very much a discipline.
Yeah. But the discipline, that's where we are. We're in quite a disciplined profession. And certainly we create products, we collect information, we try and understand what nobody else can understand and see what nobody else can see, and then present that to decision makers in the hope that they will trust us and laugh, or in our case, make what we hope is the right decision about a course of action.
But you don't need to make people laugh. You're not it's not a big laugh
no,
a
you're
minute
right. But
group.
you have to build some kind of relationship with them. We're always in a power dynamic. If you think about a comedian in an with a big audience, big amphitheatre, on the one hand, you've got a lot of power because they're all looking at you. But on the other hand, you've also got a lot of clients to satisfy, i.e. the whole room, and you'll never satisfy them all. We have that same dynamic, but with rank. So what will happen is you might have done a load of research and work to come up with a theory about who's doing what to who and why we should do something. And then you go and deliver it. But the people with rank are thinking, well, I don't need, either they're going to question how you got there. So it'd be like somebody heckling you for your methodology, and it takes all the fun out of it. It'd be like me asking a doctor, or a radiographer, I know you've said I've got cancer because you've got an x-ray of my lung, but can you explain to me what the image shows? Well, yeah, I'll spend 30 years giving you my training. You know what I mean? It's just not an option. But in our case, we can't go back and revisit. If we failed in our comms, then that job's dead in the water, because the decision makers will, like our audience, will say, "Yeah, we're going to go a different way," even though it's not optimal. And all we can do is afterwards say, when it turns out we were right, "I told you so." Maybe next time you'll trust. Like I always think you should trust a comedian, because they've usually got an idea where they're going, and you've got to give them a leeway to get there or fall flat on their ass. Because if you don't, you're not being fair to them and allowing them to present you the whole picture. It'd be kind of like, Picasso presenting one of his paintings with just one pixel in the bottom corner saying, "Can you guess what it is yet?" No. Sorry, Mark, go on.
I just wanted to come in there. I wanted to take us away from stand-up and maybe to more comedy in a more broader sense. And I wanted to ask Paul, in his when he was the head of comedy and maybe in another context. I think, and I'm saying this to somebody who knows nothing about comedy from a professional point of view. So this is a layperson asking the question. But I think I see two.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because I never could have guessed. So thank you.
Sorry.
I thought for a second there I got competition here, but no, thank you. I appreciate it.
Trust me, you absolutely haven't. Well, not intentionally, but maybe accidentally.
See, that's me being purposely cruel. That's also comedy.
Absolutely.
Hey, so I guess there are two things in comedy that I think overlap with what Howard's area and mine, which is there are two key areas, I think. First off is your use of story. Story is a tool. Yeah, you might tweak the story, but the story is important, right? Whether you're doing sketch, whether you're doing stuff, whatever, but the story is important, and yeah, comms is part of that. But I think what I wanted to try and get to was, it's also when you were the head of comedy and you're looking at content and maybe giving it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or maybe even now in your current roles, like as a YouTube critic, how do you develop this sense of, is this funny? Because I know there's no such thing as objectively funny, but are you creating a mental model of what the general population thinks is funny? Or are you just passing the test of, do I find this funny, therefore I think it's good? I found that what I find funny tends to resonate with the public. How do you, because you've got that job, right? In that head of comedy, you're literally making the decision, should this show fly or not? Is this going to make people laugh? And I have no idea how you get into that theory of mind, that mindset of what will the average public think is funny. I think that's an incredibly tall order.
So it is a good question. Number one, it does come down to the fact that, are you laughing? Is it funny? From an empirical point of view, if you're looking, let's say, and trying to judge a sitcom, then there's pieces in the sitcom that have to be there from an engineering perspective that can maintain the comedy. Because when you are looking at a TV show as an executive, really what you're looking for is longevity, believe it or not. You're not looking to see whether that one show is funny. What you're seeing is going, okay, in 5 years, if this is successful, does it have legs? Will they still be able to write material that makes sense? So most people don't see it that way. But if you, let's say, dive into a comedy like Blackadder and you go, okay, the characters are extremely clearly defined. Their hierarchy is clearly defined. They're populated by actors who are clearly funny and can deliver their lines. And obviously, it's easier to write a comedy like that we call high concept. And it delivers potential longevity. If you see so when I was head of TV comedy, I would get a script. I would call it the Taxi Judd Hirsch script. I don't know if you know Taxi. And they had this, there's this syndrome of young comedy writers where they create a population of crazy, not secondary characters, the circle of characters are really funny, but your main character is not. They think of the characters like Mary Tyler Moore, that Mary Tyler Moore is surrounded by wacky people, which she was. But if you really examine it, Mary Tyler Moore character was actually funny. So I would ask those writers and say, okay, take your main character. I want to see a 22-minute monologue where they're stuck in an elevator. And they said, well, they're not the funny person. Well, then you don't have a sitcom. Just because so that's a mechanical thing. You're looking for things that the writer knows the craft. Like my favorite comment from writers, and I read 1,200 scripts in my time, is that I really hate the sitcom format, but here's my brilliant sitcom. No, I mean, you've got to love them all. You've got to love the Golden Girls. Some others do have them. Are You Being Served? You actually have to love the genre in all its forms. You have to love Keeping Up with Appearances, one of my favorite all-time shows. Butterflies Are Free. I mean, and how good am I with these British references? What do you think, gents?
I'm very impressed. I might test you later on to see how many of that. Waiting for God. Do you like that one? Or
which one is that?
Waiting for God.
Nope, don't know that one.
Last of the Summer Wine.
No.
Oh no, that's purely Yorkshire-ish. Yeah, I know.
Don't
Dad's
know
Army?
That one.
Got to be Dad's Army.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yes.
It ain't half hot, Mum.
Yeah.
If you want to be inappropriate.
Some mothers do have it.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Love thy neighbour.
Howard, did I interrupt your question then with my question?
Anyway,
did you want to do
I hope,
sorry. Oh, go on, Paul. Sorry.
I hope that answers your question. Is that there are rules and you want the people to follow them to make their own lives easier because the audience has certain expectations. And then after that, funny people are funny, but putting them in the right situation, which allows for further writing and expansion on their characters. And the other thing that people have to understand with a sitcom is that it doesn't change. It has to return to equilibrium. So if your main character and your other characters succeed at doing something, but your show is always about failure, they have to fail at the very end to bring them right back to the beginning. And people go, oh, no, there needs to be character growth. Not in a sitcom. Sorry. No, if Sam Malone in Cheers suddenly goes, you know what, being a misogynist maybe isn't a good idea, then you've lost the character. You've got nothing to write. So these are things that, as a professional, those aspects, those are what you might call, the industry chat.
So the test isn't so much about is it funny, is it perpetually entertaining?
Yes. Does it have the legs to be perpetually entertaining? Can you think of what season 5 is going to be?
So, Howard, can I be really annoying and just push a little bit further with one more question?
Away.
So, I have this perception that over the last 20 years, I feel like the effort that goes into content, comedy or otherwise, is becoming, it seems like the content has less effort put into it. It feels like it doesn't have that degree of rigor. You mentioned lots of great shows there. I'm watching it. I'm doing a run through of Golden Girls right now, but it doesn't matter. It could be Hill Street Blues or NYPD Blue versus Blue Bloods. It could be some of the content. I take it you've seen some of the upcoming stuff for Starfleet Academy, for instance, and you start scratching your head. And
yeah.
And it just feels like, I guess what I'm going to ask you, Paul, is my view is, and I think things are just getting worse across the board, content-wise. Is there any accuracy to that, or is it just me getting older and shouting at clouds? But I just feel as that there's a quality downgrade. I don't know if it's a streaming thing or a YouTube thing, but I guess, and I don't know if it's just like we were going to talk about how, I think you mentioned in your Witcher video that the scripts for were kind of, now they're purposely written in an expositional way to reflect an audience who may be using multi-screen. That's the phrase. Yeah, multi-screen. And I just thought, wow, okay, so this just feels like a race to the bottom for me. This feels like we're just going, that culturally, it's almost like the content's getting shorter. There's less effort going into it. It almost feels like, and what I'm describing, this isn't because of AI, but it kind of feels like fan fiction, high gloss AI slop before AI slop was a thing, right? And I don't know why is that? Is that real, or is that just me again shouting at clouds?
There is, you will find in mostly dramas where people will be writing them almost like a radio script. So I did 120 radio shows with the Frantics. So I'm fairly well versed in how to write a radio script. And you have to describe what you're seeing because it's the radio. Barry pulls out, don't point that gun at me. You have to have that, right? Yes. And it's also theater of the mind, which I don't know how much radio stuff is happening in the UK, but to me, that's maybe some of the most brilliant and fun stuff, like the Goon shows and things like that. The pictures that they create in your brain and make you laugh. But what's happening is that you're seeing more and more dramas where people are explaining the fact that the person has a gun. Well, I can see they have a gun. Well, they can't see it if they're on the phone, also watching the thing. So if you listen carefully, it's sounding more and more like a radio drama. Barry, you've walked into the room. What do you want? Well, I'm watching the TV. I saw Barry walk in the room. Why are you telling me that Barry's walked into the room? But you're going to get that more and more. It's awful. That is terrible because it's uninteresting exposition.
And it just feels such a deterioration from, when TV shows, and okay, I'm not trying to compare a thing to Star Trek, TNG or TOS, but like where seasons were, 20, 25 episodes long and the content was always there. But now it feels like most shows are kind of 10 episodes long and everything feels
but that's from streaming.
Okay, fair enough.
And I'm going to say something very heretical.
Please do.
You might want to look up Helen. What's her last name? I'll have to look it up. I forgot. So she has a thesis that in broad terms, large groups of women ruin everything. So this is going to be a very popular subject for your listeners. But the history of TV is often written by a bunch of guys getting together doing stupid shit. And women rarely participated. They're the Eleanor Brons, although I don't know if Eleanor wrote. I mean, she is possibly one of the funniest people that I've ever heard. I love Eleanor Braun. But in my experience in writing comedy and performing, there are far fewer men, like a staggeringly fewer number of women actually writing comedy. We tried to get any number of women involved in our sketch troupe, but they never wrote. No one could write. And you're going to find that, common theme. I mean, the Saunders, you've got some brilliant female writers. I'm going to do my caveats. Ab Fab is maybe one of the funniest shows of all time. Absolutely fabulous. But women are in the minority. And I think what's happened in broadcast is that men are no longer allowed to play, and offensive men are no longer allowed to play. Both those things. And it's that combination of guys just doing guy shit that created an awful lot of the comedy out there. But that's not allowed anymore. And guys can't act like guys. Guys are not allowed to act stupid. Sure, we've learned lessons. There's jokes that I would not write now that I did back in the day, but I don't think I'm any less funny. I just write different jokes. And I hate to say it, but that is I hate to say it, but the BBC and a lot of organizations are just not letting guys be guys.
Is it a gender thing though, or is it more a personality type as well as a gender thing? To take your point, we've got some very funny women and talented women,
right?
Who know how to mess around, who are chaotic, can improvise. And I just wonder if we've selected for a personality type that's basically, risk averse, because my suspicion, and again, I say this as somebody with zero experience in media, so who am I to ask? But my sense is I feel like we've overly commercialized everything, so we want to take the risk out of everything. But that's a slow, gradual process that kind of accumulates over months and years where, yes, I totally accept your point that what you say, like guys be guys, it's almost like let the chaotics be chaotics, right? It's let them take, because you could say with Python.
But from anyone. Yeah. And that's true. That's a good correction, is that a lot of the best women writers actually write like men. If you read Harry Potter, to me, the jokes in it are guy jokes.
Yeah.
She might find that offensive, but to me, this is one of the reasons why I love Harry Potter, because it has that kind of anarchy, that, devil may care cleverness that men will get into. And yeah.
Fair enough.
And an awful lot of female stand-up comics actually don't write their own material. Other people write it for them.
Including men.
Yeah.
And is that, I think some of your recent content Yeah, I think you're suggesting that's like the downfall of Star Wars, the downfall of kind of other kind of IPs, that kind of thing. But I do wonder, if there's other variables behind that. So let me pivot to a slightly different thing, which is I mentioned Starfleet Academy, and apologies to listeners, I know you didn't tune into a Star Trek nerd podcast. It's an Intel
okay,
podcast.
I'm a Star Trek nerd.
We're going to go there, right? So disclosure, I am a massive Star Trek and sci-fi nerd.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, absolutely. We can tell the ship's behind me and my glasses are on, right? So
you can't see that on screen.
Listeners, you don't want to know what Paul just put on screen right now. It did emit a noise. So some of the best writers in Star Trek were female, right? For TNG, I forget the lady's name now. So what I'm getting at is that it feels like the risks that we take in entertainment, I wonder if the window for risks is closing, and maybe beyond gender, there's just a kind of like, well, we're not going to culturally, I wonder if we're shutting everything down. That it's easy. The reason why we've gone, okay, I don't really have a dog in the fight in the woke wars, right? One way or the other. But I think woke in the latest interpretation of that phrase, I can see how if you're risk averse and you want to stay in a safe space, so you want to kind of push that, I can see why that's a place you can kind of creatively, you could convince yourself that you're doing the right thing and that you're expanding there and you're playing about in a sandbox, and it's a good sandbox to play in. Whereas some of the most, shall we say, pivotal episodes of Star Trek, the ones where we had the first interracial kiss, or we've had the first homosexual references, or the first kind of, the really kind of stuff that brings a lot of tension. And it's about making people feel uncomfortable. It's not about virtual signaling and saying this is the protagonist being amazing. It's actually about bringing the audience along that journey and kind of getting them to take on the same journey of that discomfort, right? And I wonder if that's maybe I didn't see that in Discovery. And God knows what's going to happen to Starfleet Academy. I mean, you've seen the poster, but I didn't feel like we're watching people at the frontier of mankind trying to get somewhere different. I just feel like it's almost like this, they're IP neutral, right? It's like they've got the rights to the IP, but they're just going to do the other thing they want to do. So,
well, it's not Star Trek anymore. I mean, it's just something else. And I think, in TOS, you mean DC Fontana.
Forgive me, absolutely.
No, it's okay. I know. And so the thing is, she was pivotal to the group and to Star Trek. And I think what we have to understand is there was an era where, let's say, men purposely kept women out. That was bad. Then the next stage is to be open for merit. DC Fontana came on board 100% because of merit and because you had a bunch of guys who didn't push her away when they saw that she had skills that they needed. That's the change that needed to happen, and it did. But now we're in an era where you are selected for your diversity, not for your merit. And merit's a dirty word. And because it's got to be spread equally and everything's got to be happy, happy, joy, joy. And I had the Star Trek Discovery, Strange New Worlds, all that shot in Toronto. And I had friends at the very beginning of Discovery where the showrunner, who really didn't know much about Star Trek at all, some South American woman. And I had friends on the set who were tech nerds, and they would see something that was not canon and they would mention it, and then they got fired. They got fired for daring to mention that it's not canon. So everybody either was left or was fired, or they just shut up. And you had a show that was not Star Trek at all. It was Star Trek in name only. And you had, girl bosses, and you don't know why they were in charge, and everything's haphazard. And it was, Star Trek we know is a militaristic entity, and the people were constantly insubordinate. It drove Star Trek fans nuts. That doesn't mean there wasn't a group of potentially a new audience that didn't really understand what insubordination meant within the hierarchy of a military structure or a police structure. I mean, could you imagine someone talking to you, someone below you talking to you the same way that the helms person talked to the captain? I mean, they'd be gone. So, yeah, so ironically, by fighting against the patriarchy and the colonialist norm of the hierarchy of power and things like that, they completely took away the personality of the show, and they also took away the potential for conflict. One of my favorite episodes of TNG was when, God damn it, the android was in charge. Paul.
I can't remember the episode, but Data gets his own command.
Data gets his own command, and Worf gives him grief, and Data takes him onto the ready room and just gives him a dressing down and said, "This is not how things are going to work. I'm in charge. Shut up," or words to that effect.
Sure.
And they would never do that because it would have hurt Worf's feelings or something. And that was a fantastic scene, which was high in drama and only brought the two characters together closer. Anyway, so that's the kind of scene you would never get in modern Star Trek.
I love that episode as well, but I wonder if also it's a feature of, it applies to Trek, but I think it applies to other drama as well and other sci-fi, which is, you're absolutely right. It's supposed to be a disciplined organization, semi-militaristic, and we saw in Lower Decks and Disco and other things the complete abandonment of that, right? There's no pretense anymore. There's no rank structure. There was no kind of, and I get that. I just wonder if that's because maybe, how do I put this? This is a really weak way of doing it, but it's an exaggeration to prove a point. It's almost like the difference between kind of like Hunt for Red October versus A Sum of All Fears, in that like Hunt for Red October is quite a serious movie. I know it's both written by Tom Clancy, also both adapted by different people. But there's almost a case of it's adapted for different audiences, right? Hunt for Red October is still for the Tom Clancy crowd. It's still for a serious crowd.
Great. Yeah.
And Sum of All Fears feels like it's an attempt to get into the more mainstream, and it's not necessarily about gender, but it's about it's not about the military nerds. It's not about the people who are in for the warfare stuff. It feels like it's an attempt to get a bit more. And you've got to look at the Jack Ryan series. I mean, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of the Jack Ryan series.
No, neither am I.
I think they've completely gone away from the books entirely. But I just wonder if maybe because we've not got writers and creatives. And also, sorry, forgive me, I didn't mean to skip past it. It's horrible that you've had friends and colleagues who have been dismissed for kind of just raising flags. Absolutely. But I wonder if the thing I think about Star Trek is a lot of those writers and a lot of those creatives, they were only one step away from World War II, right? They, James Doohan, and they've seen blood, they've seen pain, they've seen suffering.
They've lost a finger.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and I wonder if maybe generationally, as the generations move further away from that kind of conflict and difficulty and suffering, maybe the content just gets more mild. Because
they
no
also
reference.
they not only don't believe in it, they don't like it, and they don't like the original creators. They also don't like the original audience that liked the original stuff. Mm-hmm. They're offended by us, so they have to remake it in their own image, and it's about feelings, and this is the way things should be, but in reference to what? An apartment complex where they're voting on condo rules? It doesn't matter how far in the future this is going to, Star Trek is, it still needs a hierarchy. It's not a flat, you're running a vessel. So anyways, I mean, they've completely lost it. I mean, quite frankly, I thought the J.J. Abrams Star Trek's completely lost it. It stopped being there was no more, I've coined a term, gear porn, You can tell the nerds from the non-nerds just with the Iron Man movie. The first Iron Man movie was absolute gear porn hell. Absolute gear porn heaven. Not hell.
Yes.
Because they even had a soldering, depending on how you call it in the UK.
Yeah.
Soldering scene. A scene where he soldered something. Okay? That's gear porn. Then in one of Iron Man 3, he's got a nano suit. No, he's got the suit with all the different things with rockets on them. But later on in the end game, he's got a nano suit, and as soon as he walks along, the helmet automatically goes blah, 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 blah. That's not Iron Man. Iron Man is made up of parts of metal, then stuff that breaks down and he has to deal with it, and stuff stops working, and power, he loses power. I mean, that's the whole thing that makes Iron Man work. That's gear porn. Well, the modern writers, that's too much fussing around. I got to get him into the Iron Man outfit within 3 seconds. Because I'm bored with all that other stuff. I don't need to see him, putting on the boots and then, getting the iron jock strap on and all that stuff, because they want to, move on to the other exciting stuff. Well, to me, the exciting stuff is actually having him trying to get to someplace in time while still trying to get his outfit on.
It's interesting you mentioned the Abrams Trek, though, because I think, is that kind of superficial attempt to entertain? So, for instance, for me, the microcosm is like just the bridge. When the bridge starts to look like a nightclub, something's gone wrong.
I call it a condo disco.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all kind of
huge.
But I think
where do they get the budget for it? I mean, it drives me nuts that in the future they will still be dealing with money. That's not going to stop.
Yeah.
So suddenly this vessel that they've got to build is going to be so mammoth and so utterly filled with lighting and capability and things like that. Who budgeted this? The bridge is way too big. It doesn't need to be that big. And ironically, with all that money, they still couldn't stop conduits from falling out of the ceiling when they got attacked.
No, I thought fuses. That's a so long. Howard, it looks like you have a question. Come on. I'm sorry, I've kept you out too long.
It's all right. I just feel like I've landed in a Star Trek Nerds convention.
We can get out.
Like you sat at the bar on one of these speed dating things, and you're thinking, who the f***'s this? I'm at the wrong table.
Yeah, okay. Don't pretend you're not a sci-fi nerd. You might be a Trek nerd, but I happen to know you're a massive sci-fi nerd.
Coming back to
the topic.
Sure.
There is a point that stands out to me in all that. And firstly, it's that we tend to get we replace human skills with what I might call machines. Like you buy a phone's a phone. I'm old enough to remember the good old Bakelite phone and the dial. And then we get a phone that's a mobile phone. And then we decide we'll put a camera in it. And the phone's not as good as a real phone. The camera's not as good as a real camera ad infinitum. And what you're talking about there with the development of the industry and the Star Trek bridge, we've had that in Intel within law enforcement, whereby clients of our products can be really boring. If you've got somebody like me in front of you saying, you need to do this about this type of crime, because if you don't, the proverbial's going to hit the fan, or, with an opportunity to interdict here with master criminal X, and if we don't take it, we've missed it. And it's what we do. It's not very entertaining. I don't have I've got a face, made for mediocrity. I'm the before advert for plastic surgery. But the message is still good. And then we have IT comes along and it allows us to create multidimensional visualizations. And our clients love all this because, hey, look at these big pictures. And they start thinking they can read the picture, like I mentioned earlier about the X-ray. They can't. So suddenly the human engagement, the intellect, the sexy bit of our skill set, the invisible bit, like the invisible bit of a comedian's skill set, becomes obscured by the tech. It'd be kind of like, how these days, all right, we've got CGI in films, but imagine a comedy show and think of things like Shrek, where you've got perfectly respectable, funny people stroke comedians and funny actors voicing over cartoon characters. Very scripted. And yeah, okay, it's funny, but I can listen to Eddie Murphy playing a donkey versus watching him live in one of his stand-up routines, or even in one of the films where I know it's a scripted part, but he's kind of playing Eddie Murphy. And the comedic value is chalk and cheese. The cartoon is kind of anodyne mush. So for me, we're going in that direction. It's kind of what you're alluding to in our profession as well as yours, where the kit takes over the intellect, and the sexy bit of what we do is what we do in our heads.
So you need the machine that goes ping.
Yeah. We use machines, but the machine product is not the end. The germ of the idea came out of a head. The machine is the ego to Dr. Frankenstein helping you achieve that. And I love tools as much as anybody else. But the end product is actually a combination of the tool plus the intellect. And without the intellect, it's just the tool.
My answer is you're working for idiots.
Yeah. Yeah, but have you noticed how globally there seem to be rather a lot of idiots in senior places these days? And I don't just mean in government, I mean across organisations. I really liked what you said earlier on about treat your customers. Don't be fazed by them. We have that. And you really do have to go in, and you've got to be polite and respectful and follow the discipline and the rank and all in our area and all the rest of it. And there are rank structures in business and the private sector just as much, cultural barriers and glass ceilings and all the rest of it. But we have to bypass all that and speak truth to power, but in a way that, like you said, doesn't offend. And you mentioned we don't use comedy. Actually, we do. And it's really good with the stuffed shirts, the higher echelons, as a bit like a comedian would do. If you're going to approach a griefy topic, humour or something that challenges them, humour is often a good way to open it with them because it gives them a get-out clause. I always remember I once had to go to Toronto to a conference, a global conference by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. These are all the great glitterati with more badges and brocade than anybody from around the world, but primarily North America. The rest of the world are lesser human beings in this arena. And I was asked, will you come and do keynote speech to open the conference on the latest developments in technology for our field? Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, I had no rank and no power. I was just a working stiff like Mark. But I walk into this room of like 3,500 chiefs, and they're all really conscious of their rank amongst their peers. You know, it's a bit like I say, when you go to the award ceremonies, they're all smiling, but they're all looking at how am I being perceived by my peers. They're not involved in the real world. So I said to them, I said, right, I've been asked to come and talk about this topic, and I was really worried because I thought it might be a bit highbrow and technical for you. You know, you're very clever people, but you don't use IT and work in these detailed back office worlds. So I says, I rang some of my American colleagues and said, what do you think? When I talked them to them, they said, we're all fine with it, but the Canadians are going to struggle. So half the audience, the Americans went, hey, and all the Canadians have got their heads down like this. So then I said, but then I rang some Canadian colleagues based on that feedback. And they said, no, hey, we're fine, but the Americans won't have a price. You know, they'll have no idea. So then the Canadians cheer and the Americans put their heads down. So my attempt at comedy was on the one hand a resounding success because it broke the barriers. But I managed to not only engage, but offend every single person in that room, regardless of which nation they were from, before I started. But it broke the ice. And it's all these people in that room with all that power were suddenly powerless in terms of they'd shown themselves to be little boys and girls. You know, as long as I get one up over my Canadian colleague.
But you're in the field. You're allowed to do it. I'm not. I once presented to a whole bunch of high-ranking police officers, and I made the mistake of saying, by the way, I have a cop joke. And they were just like, not a reaction.
Yeah. It's like Mark and I talking about your field.
No, it's okay. No, we're much looser than that. But I went, okay, I've started. I better do it. And the joke was, there's this guy in a fast car, Mercedes, and he's driving and he's like enjoying going over the speed limit. And he sees this cop car pulls up behind him in one of these Crown Vic. I don't know if you know what a Crown Vic is.
Yeah.
And
ride in the back of a few.
Okay. And classic police car in North America. And the guy panics and he stomps on it. And because he's got a very fast Mercedes, but the Crown Vic with the big V8 pulls up behind him, but now he's got his lights flashing. And he goes, that was dumb. I panicked, and he pulls off to the side of the road, and the cop saunters over to the driver's window and does the roll down the window thing. And guy hits the button, rolls down the window. And the cop said, well, that was a pretty stupid thing to do. But let me tell you something. I'm at the end of my shift. If you can give me a convincing reason why I shouldn't arrest you and take you back to the station, and because it's going to save me 2 hours of paperwork, I'll let you go. And the guy goes, well, 2 weeks ago, a cop stole my wife, and I thought you were trying to give her back to me. You know that one. Howard knows the joke. I'm
not laughing because I love that joke.
It's a great joke.
As a married cop who's been divorced.
Anyways.
And has paid a lot of money to be insulted by professionals.
And I think that's neat that you know the joke. I think it's hilarious that you know the joke. Anyway.
Yeah.
It worked really well, broke the ice, and then I was able to.
No, it's the perfect joke, but they wouldn't cough it in public.
I think the thing with cops and humour is that, and it's a very politically sensitive thing, but obviously gallows humour is a thing.
No,
gallows humour is a coping strategy, and quite rightly, sometimes you would have a joke with your colleagues during an emotionally intense situation that you would never ever have in a broader context.
No.
But unfortunately, sometimes it's never deemed in that view when it comes to light, right? And I think and I'm not in any way justifying anything.
No, I understand, but
prejudice.
Cops have a hard time.
I'm sure it's the same for comedians. You'll be in a group of comedians bouncing ideas, and somebody will throw one out there, and the rest of the room will go. So, and that's your own safe space. That's, your own safe environment amongst your fellow colleagues in private.
You need to see a movie called The Aristocrats.
Yes.
Yes.
I know it.
Okay. Unbelievably blue movie. I mean, from a language perspective, but it'll give you the best idea as to the minds of a stand-up and the kinds of things that make each other funny. Because it's a movie for stand-ups only. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I
The
get
regular people out there,
it's just you're speaking a different language.
Yeah. I mean, the whole point is each comedian in a friendly, competitive way tries to say the most vile, offensive joke they possibly can. And they're trying to talk.
Yeah.
It's a competition, but a fun one. Not a bad one at all. So anyways, that's it for me. I don't know if I can offer you anything more that's of value.
Paul, you've been very, very patient and very kind to give us your time today. Thank you for coming on to the pod. I don't think I'm hoping we may have you back for talk about other things in the future. But for now, I think that's
Hungarian cuisine.
Absolutely. Why not? Howard, anything else from you?
Yeah. Next time I'm going to ban Star Wars and Star Trek.
It was very small.
Yes.
You can edit it out.
We'll talk about Spike Milligan
Fine.
and the Goons versus Spike Milligan's War Memoirs and Q, which I know rather well.
The bed sitting room.
Well, yes, but I'll save that for another day.
Okay.
No worries.
Paul, it's been great.
Thanks,
I love
Howard.
to meet you, and I love to talk to you again.
No problem, Mark. Bye, Howard.
Take care.
All the best. Take care.